Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, a big welcome. My name's Jenny and I mainly create lifestyle content on this channel, which pretty much means I make videos about everything and anything. I tend to focus on things like disability, chronic illness, mental health, Disney, a bit of fashion, a bit of beauty, a bit of travel when we can do that kind of thing, and anything in between. So hopefully there'll be something on this channel that you will enjoy, and I hope you stick around to watch this video. So in today's video I wanted to talk a little bit about something called the disability price tag. If you don't know, I am a disabled person. I have a number of chronic illnesses including Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, POTS, and various other things that come with those, and because of those I am disabled. I have to use a wheelchair and find life difficult to kind of access, and yeah, being a disabled person, you kind of start to understand just how different life can be for disabled people and how much it can cost as a disabled person to live in our society. And I just thought it would be really interesting to speak a little bit about this, to speak about some of the extra costs that people with disabilities have, because I think until I became disabled, I had absolutely no idea of the kind of costs that people with disabilities faced. So I thought this might just help to raise a little bit of awareness, to help people understand about those extra costs that are involved, and also to just help other disabled people to kind of hopefully feel like they're not on their own, that it's not just them that's kind of maybe struggling financially, and yeah, hopefully it might do some of those kind of things. So I thought I'd just start by reading some of the statistics and stuff from the charity Scope. I'm going to look at my phone because I want to make sure I get this right, so apologies for not looking at the camera. But basically, if you don't know about Scope, I will leave them in the description below. They're a great charity for disabled people, and in 2019 they wrote a report about the disability price tag, and it revealed about all of the kind of extra costs that are faced by disabled people and how those kind of impact on disabled people. So they found that disabled people on average face extra costs of £583 a month. This is compared to a non-disabled person. And then on average, a disabled person's extra costs are equivalent to almost half of their income, and that does not include housing costs. It said that 1 in 5 disabled people face extra costs of more than £1,000 a month because of their disability. And it also found that disabled people's money does not tend to go as far as that of non-disabled people. So on average, £100 for a non-disabled person is equivalent to just £68 for a disabled person. And the result of this is that disabled people are more likely to have a lower standard of living even when they earn the same as a non-disabled person, which is just crazy to think, you know, that disabled people are at such a kind of inequality, like an unequal kind of, you know, place to non-disabled people in financial stakes. I mean, as a disabled person, I have experienced a lot of inequalities and difficulties to access the world in the same way as non-disabled people do. And I don't know, I suppose until you become disabled, you don't necessarily even think of the financial impact. And there is a lot of stigma, misbelief about, you know, disabled people being on benefits and getting everything handed to them on a plate, and you know, you're not having to work for anything. You know, a lot of these like horrible beliefs that go around about disabled people that aren't true. And, you know, people just seem to think that as a disabled person, why would you struggle with finances? You get given everything you could ever need, and that is so far from the truth. So I'm hoping through this video that I might just be able to kind of break down those kind of myths a little bit and help people to understand all of those extra costs that come with being disabled. So to try and break down some of these extra costs, I thought I would use the categories that Scope have used in their report, because it just made sense to me to do it like that. I'm going to link their report below so that you can have a read of the whole thing, because it's a really interesting piece of research, and it's quite sad as well. But they also they make recommendations to government of how to kind of make improvements as well. So yeah, they've got different categories to kind of put the kind of extra expenses into, and the first category is specialist goods and services. This is then broken down into different kind of subcategories, and the first subcategory is equipment and home adaptations. Now, before I kind of start going through all these things, I will just say these are only the things that I've kind of thought of off the top of my head, and there's a lot of stuff here, but there's going to be more expenses that people have that I haven't thought of, so don't kind of take this as a kind of exhaustive list. You know, there are going to be other expenses as well, but hopefully this is going to just give you a bit of insight into some of those expenses. So some of the extra expenses that disabled people have that come under equipment and home adaptations. The first thing would be a wheelchair. A lot of people seem to think that you just get given a wheelchair, and that's not always the case. So some people might need a manual wheelchair, some people might need a power wheelchair, some people might have both. I have both. My manual wheelchair came from the NHS, so I haven't had to pay for that. However, it is very much a standard wheelchair, and it doesn't suit me at all. I can't really use it. It's very, very difficult to get any kind of really like specialist wheelchair through the NHS. They have very, very like set criteria, and so you don't get a lot of choice in what you can have. Some people are able to get a power wheelchair through the NHS, but I didn't qualify for that. So a lot of people are having to buy their own wheelchairs, whether that be a manual wheelchair or a power chair, and the cost of wheelchairs is just astronomical. Manual wheelchairs, I mean, you can get a pretty bog standard one for not a lot of money, but you can pay hundreds up to thousands of pounds for a manual wheelchair, you know, if it's a kind of specialist kind of manual wheelchair. And then power chairs, you can pay again from hundreds of pounds up to thousands of pounds. They are not cheap, and it is a huge investment for somebody to have to put in. So yeah, that is one of the biggest ones, certainly for me, is the cost of the wheelchair. And then once you've got your wheelchair, you are also going to need to have a think about wheelchair insurance, which wasn't something that I considered until fairly recently. It's mainly, I've got the wheelchair insurance for my power chair, because if I'm out and my power chair breaks down, I'm stuck. So I now pay for wheelchair insurance so that if that happens, I can get recovered if that needs to be done. But also I think they do like certain repairs on the power chair as well, because that power chair is my lifeline. So that's something else you're paying out for, is the insurance. And then there's also things like wheelchair accessories, so things like I don't know, like a rain cover or a cover for your power chair if it needs to be left outside, blankets, bits that you need to put on it so that you can, I don't know, carry your crutches, or carry a bag, you know, like having a bag at the bottom so that you can put your stuff in there so that it's accessible. There are so many different accessories for wheelchairs, and you might say that some of them are a luxury or not necessary, but yeah, please excuse the aeroplane in the background. But yeah, a lot of them make life easier for a disabled person, so a lot of them are necessary and they help to make that disabled person's life a bit easier. So as you can see, the costs are already starting to rack up. Another cost might be walking aids. So again, sometimes you can get these from the NHS, so things like crutches, walking sticks, walkers, that kind of thing. But it completely depends on what your condition is and the NHS in your area as well. So at the moment I've got NHS crutches because I had an operation, but before then I wasn't able to get any kind of NHS walking aid, so I had to pay for my own, like walking sticks, that kind of thing. So it is very hit and miss, and I've often found with chronic conditions it seems to be a lot more difficult to get that kind of thing on the NHS. So again, you can get pretty standard ones for a relatively reasonable price, but those are often pretty ugly and not necessarily particularly comfortable to use. So a lot of people find themselves having to pay more money because they want something that is more comfortable, more ergonomic, and also something that looks nice, because, you know, just because you're disabled, it doesn't mean you want boring grey or silver walking aids. You know, you want to be able to show your personality a bit as well. So you've then got things like specialist equipment. So for example, things like adapted cutlery, screen readers, hoists, like special like mugs. There's literally like an endless list of like different kind of things you might need for your disability, and it's going to depend on what your disability is, the kind of things that you might need. But yeah, this can end up just piling up, like all these little things that don't seem that much. You know, you end up having to buy lots and lots of different things, and it soon adds up. And it's not like, a lot of the time, it's not like you can just go down to like, you know, a normal shop and buy them. You're having to go to a specialist shop where they seem to put like a bit of a premium on it because it's something for a disabled person, and then you're ending up paying more. So for example, if someone's got adapted cutlery and it breaks, they can't just go down to like Tesco's and pick up a pack of like, you know, fairly cheap cutlery. They're having to go to a mobility shop, or going online to like a specialist place, and it tends to cost more money. So all these things add up, and it's not like you've got a choice about whether you want to use them. These are things that help you to live your life in a more accessible way as a person with a disability. You've then got things like home adaptations, so that might be things like putting in a wet room, widening doors, levelling floors, putting in ramps or half steps and things like that, just making your home more accessible, because a lot of homes are not accessible for disabled people. And again, some of these things might be able to be paid for through grants or like social services type things, but a lot of the time disabled people are having to pay for these things themselves, and they are expensive. You know, having like major structural changes to your house, it's not going to be cheap. And again, these aren't things that are necessarily done through choice. It's to make your house accessible so that you can live there in a way that means you can be as independent as possible. So, you know, these are like huge costs that can come with being disabled that people just don't realise are kind of part of, yeah, being a disabled person. Another cost that I have encountered is getting a stair lift. So we have like 3 floors because we've got a loft conversion. My bedroom happens to be in the loft conversion, and so we have stair lifts for 2 flights of stairs. Even if my bedroom wasn't in the loft conversion, I think we would still want to do that because it would mean that I would have access to the whole house. Again, this is possibly something you can get a grant for, but a lot of people aren't eligible, or they can't access that grant, or help through social services. And believe me when I tell you, stair lifts are not cheap. We had 2 quotes to get the stair lifts put in, and there was like, I mean, one was literally double the other one, but even the one that was lower was still a heck of a lot of money. And yes, my stair lifts have been absolutely life-saving. I wouldn't be able to access like our house without them, but they are a huge expense. Something else that you might need to be investing in as a disabled person are kind of like smaller aids, so things like braces and splints for like joints and like, you know, various things that you need to put on to help keep joints in place and to keep you like I would say free from pain, but probably not free from pain, but you know, to have less pain. Things like glasses, hearing aids, that kind of thing, dental work, so braces and stuff like that. A lot of disabled people will need these kind of things, and they might need them updating more regularly. So I find with my glasses, my EDS can affect my sight, and it can change quite rapidly. So I often find myself having to buy new glasses a lot more regularly than non-disabled people that I know. And yeah, there are some kind of bits where you can get help with some of these things, but again, a lot of the time it's your own money that you're having to put in to getting things that mean that you can see, that you can hear, that you can be without having a joint pop out, or you know, to be in as little as pain as possible. So yeah, these kind of things which don't necessarily seem particularly huge will soon add up. Another big thing that a lot of people with disabilities are going to need is a specially adapted car. There is the Motability scheme for something like this, but even then that takes like part of your benefit to go towards that. It's not that you're getting necessarily a free car, you lose half of your benefit so that you can have that car. I have a Motability car and it is honestly a lifesaver. I would not have been able to get out of the house without it. But it's an expense. It is like part of, you know, a disability, and not everyone is entitled to like be on the Motability scheme for whatever reason. And adapted cars can be so expensive. Even on the Motability scheme, you've still got like the advanced payment, and certainly I'm finding this time, because I need quite a big car, because I've got a big wheelchair, I need like things like hand controls, an electric tailgate to make it more accessible, a hoist, things like that. It all comes at like extra costs. So what people see is like you having a free car. It isn't really that at all. Another thing that a lot of people don't think about is that disabled people often need clothes that are easier to put on, that they might be more comfortable, just stuff that's more accessible. And that might mean that it's not you're not like necessarily able to get clothes that are cheaper. So I often find that I struggle with things like buttons, zips. I need stuff that's easy to kind of pull over my head, because otherwise I find that joints pop out. If somebody is in a wheelchair full time, they might need stuff that is, you know, more accessible for them in the wheelchair, or more comfortable for them in the wheelchair. And those kind of clothes aren't always the cheapest like options there, but they, you know, don't have a lot of choice because they need it to be accessible, so that either they or their carer can put things on and take them off easily. And it's just little things like this that people don't often think about, that, you know, they add up, and added to everything else, it's just more and more stuff that you've got to pay for. You've then also often got to pay for things like monitoring equipment, so things like a blood pressure monitor, an oxygen monitor, various other like health monitors depending on what your kind of chronic illness or disability is. A lot of the time you can't get that kind of stuff, you know, from the NHS or anything like that. I've been told by various doctors that I should purchase my own blood pressure monitor, or I should get an oxygen monitor to keep an eye on things like that. And those kind of things aren't particularly cheap, especially if you want to get one that is kind of recommended, or, you know, has been tested and you know that is going to be good. So yeah, that's another expense added. Some disabled people also have a service dog, and that comes with a whole load of more like costs, you know, for owning a dog. You've got food, you've got vet's bills and things like that, and different service dog charities have different kind of like packages and things that they offer, but there are still like huge costs that come with having a service dog. They can obviously be a huge lifeline to people, and a lot of people would not be without their service dog, but they have to take into account the costs that are going to come with it and whether they can afford to have that help. And then the last thing in this category is things that prove your disability. So for example, a blue badge. You don't get a blue badge for free, you do have to pay for it. You need to pay for a disabled rail card that proves that you're disabled, a CEA card for the cinema. There's various other like things that prove your disability to help you perhaps get some support or savings further down the line, but they still need that initial investment of you actually paying for that card or that badge or whatever it is before you might get any kind of help. So the next subcategory in this category is therapies, and the first one that I was going to talk about are kind of like complementary therapies, so things like massage, acupuncture, seeing a chiropractor, getting foot care, all those kind of things that aren't kind of seen as necessary, you know, help that you are entitled to in the NHS, but that will help you to manage your condition, are things that you're going to have to pay for. So up until fairly recently, I would have regular massages because they really helped with my pain, but they're really expensive to have massages regularly. To have acupuncture, you can get it on the NHS in some circumstances, but if you want it on a more long-term basis, you're going to have to pay for it. If you want to see a chiropractor, you can't get that on the NHS, but that might help with your pain. Or if you need specialist foot care to see like a chiropodist or something, you can't always get them to see someone like that on the NHS. So again, you're having to pay for that. You've then got things like physiotherapy, occupational therapy, hydrotherapy, speech and language therapy, things like that, which ordinarily you can get on the NHS. However, if you have a long-term chronic illness or disability, the NHS doesn't tend to cater for that. You get like your 6 sessions of something, and that's kind of it. I mean, there are exceptions to the rule and all that kind of thing, but in general terms, you can't often get like the extended therapy of that kind of stuff that you need. So a lot of people find themselves paying for private physio, private hydrotherapy, seeing private occupational therapists, speech and language therapists, all that kind of thing. And that doesn't come cheap. You're paying, a professional person for their time and their expertise, and you're having to do that on a regular basis for as long as you live, basically. And so, yeah, that soon kind of the costs of that soon rack up. And then comes your mental health, because often when you have a disability or a chronic illness, you're going to need some support, some psychological support, because there's a lot of stuff that you have to go through that you might just need somebody to talk to about, or you may have come across, having like medical trauma and you might need some help with that. And again, mental health support in that kind of capacity is really, really difficult to get on the NHS. The waiting lists are often long, you often don't get a huge amount of sessions, and also a lot of NHS therapies don't offer kind of mental health support specifically for people with chronic illnesses or disabilities. So again, that's something else that disabled people often end up having to pay for themselves. You may also find yourself paying for private medical appointments. Sometimes this isn't out of choice necessarily, although obviously everybody has the choice about whether they're paying for private medical appointments, but sometimes you have exhausted the NHS in that you perhaps can't get the referrals that you need, you're not being taken seriously, and your only hope of getting any kind of diagnosis or treatment is to go privately. And once you kind of start in the private system, it can be quite difficult to then get out of it, because you may get a diagnosis from a private doctor and then they might refer you back to the NHS, but they may not take that private doctor seriously, or they may not agree with the treatments that they have suggested. So it can become very expensive very quickly. Another thing that a lot of disabled people have to pay for are carers or personal assistants. Again, this one, so you can often get these through social services, but a lot of people still have to pay some sort of contribution. They do a financial assessment and it just varies. But a lot of your benefit will often go on paying for carers or a personal assistant. And it's not just paying their wages that kind of comes into the costs. It's having another person in your life. So, if you've got a carer there, a lot of the time they'll be using your energy, they'll be using water, they'll be using tea and coffee and milk and things like that, and that's going to come at a cost. If you want to go out and you have your carer with you, some arrangements mean that you have to pay for your carer's lunch or drinks or travel and things like that. So it gets really expensive because you can't go out on your own, which means you're having to pay for an extra person all the time. The next thing that you often have to pay a lot for when you're disabled is medication, and that can include things like catheters, nutritional drinks, and then just bog standard medication, which certainly when you're chronically ill you can be on a whole load of medications, and it can get super expensive. There are things that can help, so for example prepayment certificates. Some people will be entitled to free prescriptions, but even so it can still get really expensive for a lot of people who aren't entitled to those kind of things. I mean, anyone can get a prepayment certificate, but even so, that's still an extra expense. And some prescriptions may not come under, NHS prescriptions. So some people end up having private prescriptions, and they can cost whatever that prescription is worth. So it can be, hundreds of pounds sometimes if that's what the person needs. Another medication that I find myself having to pay for very regularly is paracetamol. You can sometimes get paracetamol on prescription, but doctors don't like to prescribe it because it costs them a lot more than it costs you to buy it from the chemist. But I'm on 8 paracetamol a day, and that means that I get through paracetamol packets pretty darn quickly, and it soon starts to add up. One packet of paracetamol might not be particularly expensive, but when you're taking 8 a day, and that's every day, you keep having to obviously buy a lot of boxes, it soon adds up. And then there are the vitamins and supplements that you're often recommended to take by various doctors. I am on a lot of different vitamins and supplements, not as many as I used to be because I have cut some of them down because the cost was just getting astronomical. But certainly, like my gastroenterology doctors have often recommended being on quite high doses of certain like vitamins and supplements. And rather than just taking like a multivitamin, it tends to be like you need to take a high dose of this one and then a high dose of that one. And you can end up literally having to buy like, I don't know, however many different types of vitamins and minerals, and they are not cheap. Even if like, I know like we try and often get them in like 3 for 2s and things like that, but it still costs a lot of money, and I don't know quite how much they help me. It's difficult to tell, but when you've been recommended it by a doctor, you kind of want to be able to try it, and so yeah, it can get really expensive. And then the last part for this category is being in hospital, which you might kind of automatically kind of think, well, why does that cost you anything? But it can be expensive being in hospital. So if you want to pay for the TV in hospital, that is going to cost you a small fortune. I know a lot of disabled people and chronically ill people who kind of go into hospital a lot will often take things with them so they don't have to pay for the TV. But, being in hospital, you kind of want some stuff to entertain you, and sometimes you're going to have to pay for the TV, well, if you can afford it. So there's that. There is paying for like your own food and drink if you can perhaps not eat some of the hospital food. It can sometimes be difficult if you're on like a specialist diet to get the food you need when you're in hospital, so sometimes you're having to pay for that to be brought in from like relatives and stuff. Parking and travel if you've got visitors coming, or if you need, like, so for me, if I'm in hospital, like one of my parents will usually come each day to help me with stuff that perhaps the staff on the ward can't help me with because they haven't got the time. So my parents are having to pay for the travel and for, the parking and what have you for coming to the hospital every day. So it gets pretty expensive just being in a hospital. And then the last subcategory for this category is toys, which is quite a specific one, but I wanted to bring this in because this obviously applies to disabled children. And, for disabled children, you may often need to buy specialist toys that are suited to their needs. So, for example, you might need like sensory tents or specialist sensory equipment to help stimulate them, to help, help them feel calm, or to, so that they've got things that they can enjoy. You may have to buy things like specialist buggies and push chairs. So it's not a case of, you can just always go out to, Smith's and buy off-the-shelf toy from there. Some children may need more specialist things that are more safe for them or that are more suited to their needs. And these toys often come with quite a high price tag. The next category is greater use of non-specialist goods and services, and the first subcategory is energy. So as a disabled person, you often you don't get so much choice, I guess, in the housing that you have. So for example, you might need to have more suitable housing that's closer to relatives. So for me, if I moved out, I would still need to be closer to my family because I would need their help. And that accommodation needs to be accessible, so the choice goes down, and it also means that you're more limited in the area that you can look in, so it may be more expensive than if you were perhaps able to go out somewhere that isn't so expensive, but that choice is taken away from you. And then disabled people also often have higher energy bills. So for example, if you're sitting in one place for a long time, or if you have trouble regulating your temperature, you may need to pay like more for your heating, because you might need to have it on like all the time, or you may need to have it warmer than other people would have it. And also if you use kind of like assistive technology, so things like electric wheelchairs, if you've got a bed that needs to be plugged in, a hoist, all sorts of things like that, they need to be plugged in using more electricity, so that's going to push your energy bill up, which is what a lot of disabled people find. The next subcategory is transport and accommodation, and the first thing I was going to add to this one is travel to and from hospital appointments. I know for me and a lot of other disabled people, going to hospital appointments is a very regular occurrence, and travel can be horrendously expensive, whether you're going by car, by train, by bus, whatever you're having to pay for. If you're doing that on a regular basis, that is going to get really expensive. And then obviously you've got parking at the hospital, which is also really, really expensive. If you're having to travel to a hospital that's perhaps quite a long way away, which is often the case if you need to see a particular specialist, often disabled people are having to pay for accommodation because they can't do the journey, in one day. And so then having to find a hotel. I know a lot of my hospital appointments are in London, and I'm lucky enough to live like close enough so that I can usually do it in one day. But a lot of people I know can't do that, and so they're having to pay London hotel prices just so that they can go to a hospital appointment. A lot of disabled people also end up having to pay for taxis and private hire vehicles because public transport isn't always accessible, and that means that it's often more expensive. I've found myself having to do this a lot in London because a lot of tube stations aren't accessible. Sometimes buses just aren't great for disabled people, so I end up having to pay for taxis, which are going to cost a lot more than if I could just go on the tube or the bus. There's then the cost of potentially having to travel further to be able to take part in accessible activities. So for example, if you want to go to a restaurant, or to go and get your hair cut, or to get your nails done, or go to the dentist, you need to be able to find a place where it's accessible. So accessible for a wheelchair, accessible if you're visually impaired, accessible if you're deaf. And those places aren't always very easy to come by, so you may end up having to travel further to get to those places because you simply don't have the choice to go to a place that's closer to home. So you're having to pay for that extra travel on top of that just to be able to access a similar service to the non-disabled people can. And then if you want to go on holiday as a disabled person, that often ends up costing more as well, because you need to pay for an accessible room, which can often be more money. You may need to pay for an extra room for your carer, which obviously makes the price go up. You may have to hire specialist disability equipment if you need a specialist bed or a hoist or something like that, and you can't obviously take yours with you. You may need to hire something like that so that you can still enjoy your holiday and be safe. So holidays as a disabled person can get very expensive. Not every holiday place is accessible, so your choice is limited as well. So even trying to do something relaxing like going on a holiday can be really stressful and can have a huge financial impact. And then the last subcategory for this one is food, and I've got a few points for this one. And the first is about convenience food and pre-prepared meals. A lot of disabled people that I know and chronically ill people find themselves having to rely more on ready meals, pre-prepared food, that kind of thing. And those kind of things come at a premium, rather than being able to necessarily buy the raw ingredients and make something yourself. For a lot of disabled people, it might be easier if things are pre-cut, or if there's a ready meal, so you don't have to use so much energy for cooking something. And it's not necessarily a choice, it's it's being able to eat. And I know if my parents have been out, or if my parents have been away, I've had to rely on that stuff quite a lot. And it's quite shocking how expensive that kind of stuff is when you don't necessarily have the choice of being able to use it or not. You've then got catering for specialist diets. So often people with disabilities and chronic illnesses can be on specialist diets, whether that's gluten-free, dairy-free, low FODMAP. There's all kinds of different diets that people might be on, and that can end up being quite expensive if you're having to buy, you know, specialist food, or if you can only eat certain foods and you're not able to perhaps buy ones that are particularly cheap. It can get quite expensive having to cater for a specialist diet. And then as a disabled person, you may also have less choice as to where you can shop. This could be because of accessibility of shops, but it also could be if you need a carer to help you shop and you only have a limited amount of time. You may only be able to go to somewhere that's like fairly near because you don't have the time to go somewhere further. And that place that's nearest to you may not necessarily be the cheapest place to shop. So I don't know, it might be that the nearest place to me was a Marks and Spencer's, but actually to get the cheaper food I might want to go to Aldi, but I don't have the time with the carer to be able to do that, so I have to pay Marks and Spencer's prices. So as a disabled person, that can soon, you know, rack up. If you're having to go to that more expensive place every week to buy your food, it can soon become quite expensive. And then the last category is higher costs for non-specialist goods and services. And the only subcategory for this one that I've got is insurance. So you, as a disabled person, are often charged more for insurance, or you're denied it altogether. They look at your conditions and the price automatically goes up, whether that's for holiday insurance, life insurance, travel insurance, whatever it is that you want to insure. As a disabled person, it's usually going to be more expensive. So yeah, that's just another extra cost. So those are just a few of the costs that people with disabilities experience that perhaps non-disabled people don't have to pay for. I just hope that this has helped people to understand that there are huge costs involved with being disabled, and just because someone is on benefits, it doesn't mean that those benefits are going to cover those costs. So I just hope that it's helped to raise a little bit of awareness, but also if you are disabled, that you perhaps feel like you're not as alone in having to deal with all those costs as you maybe thought you were. If you have enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more from me, please give me a like and subscribe to my channel. Also hit the notification bell. That means you'll get notified every time I upload a video so you don't miss anything. Leave me a comment, let me know what you think about some of these costs. Is it stuff that you experience? Have you got other costs that I haven't talked about that you want to bring up? And also let me know if there's any other videos you'd like to see me do. I was thinking of doing another video after this of some help, like with these costs, so where you might be able to go for some help to like help you out with some of these costs, because there are grants and things like that available, and I thought it might be useful if I talked through some of those things as well. So let me know if that would be helpful, but also let me know if there's any other videos you'd like me to do. I'm planning my Christmas content at the moment, so do let me know if there's any Christmassy videos you'd like to see. It really helps to know what you guys want to watch. Also come and follow me on social media. My links are in the description below, but I will pop my Instagram and Twitter up here. Those are the two platforms that I'm mainly on, so do come over and say hello. It would be lovely to talk to you, and I'll see you in another video very soon. Bye!